All right, so we're gonna see how to use the methods already created in jQuery. Some of the most common methods that there are there. So the first thing to do, we know is that we need to look for jQuery. We're gonna use the one from Google. I'll copy this, bring it to my script here. Remember, it's always good practice to add the type. And if you want it to work locally, HTTP. If you don't, it's only gonna work online. Okay. So, first of all, let's get back into functions. How functions work in JavaScript, right? Well, a function, you have to declare it or create a function by saying function and the name of the function, right? For example, change CSS, whatever. And I'm gonna have a few divisions here. All of them with the same class. Alright, and I'm gonna give them some styling in CSS. So let's say width 50 pixels, height 50 pixels, margin 10 pixels, float left. Okay, border 2 pixels, solid red, and the background color 333. Okay. So far what I have is just my squares here. Whoops. Oh, I have to link, sorry. My style sheet link, type, text CSS, rel style sheet, href styles.css. Okay, and before I forget, I'm going to link my functions as well. So script type text JavaScript source functions.javascript. Okay. Very good. So I have here my squares. So my function, what I'm going to do, just a regular JavaScript function, is when I click on a specific square, right, I'm going to change their size. So let's see. With JavaScript, it will be something like onClick equals the name of the function. In this case is change CSS, right? For my function to know which element I'm clicking on, I would need to get a parameter, right? An ID or the element itself. If it was an ID, then I would do something like document.get element by ID, right? And then I can change their style. Dot style dot, let's say, height. And I'm gonna change it to 100 pixels, and I'll do the same thing for the width, right? Okay, so let's say I'm using an ID. Then in my HTML I will have to assign an ID to each one of them, right? For example, here square S1, square 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, and I would need to parse that ID through my function so it can actually know what we're talking about. There you go. So now the function will take the ID and we'll use that ID to change the element. Nope. I think I added something that shouldn't be there. You get used to it, you know, after a pixel, okay, semicolon. Yeah, that was a problem. Okay, perfect. So I am clicking and it changes according to the specific ID, right? We also know that I could send maybe the complete element, not the ID, but the element itself. So then I don't have to get element by ID. I could just get the element. And in order for my function to know which element I am sending, instead of sending the ID, I used a magical word that says this. This means the element that I'm clicking on, this element. So I send the whole element. Right? Therefore, I do not need any more IDs. I'm sending this. Oops. Okay? So, the function is not finding the element by its ID, but it's getting the whole element. So once with the element, we can get the style, change the height, etc. When working with Jquery, there is already methods that allow us to do these kind of actions like onClick. And we can assign them straight from the JavaScript file by calling, for example, a selector which would be square, my class square. So with Jquery, I would do something like class square dot click, which means when I click, I'm going to do something. What? Whatever I put in here. Whatever I put in here, that is what is what's going to happen when I click. Now, let's say that I want to what I want to do is to execute this function here, change CSS. Well, I'm gonna have to put that function right in here. Function open close curly brackets, right? And then I will execute that function in here. Now, I do not have to send the element through. All right. So as I was saying, I don't need to send element through here because the element is already being in place. The element is whatever division with class or division in this case with class square I'm clicking on, so I don't have to send any parameter. I can simply use this right away. Now, since I'm using Jquery, I'm going to put this as a selector in Jquery, right? And then I can change their styling. To change the style in CSS in Jquery is .css. Open, close. Okay. As we saw before, I could just put, like, for example, height, comma, and the value. Same thing for the width, like this. Or I can use JSON to change many styles at the same time. So with JSON, I will need to put curly brackets inside, open, close. Instead of commas, we use colon, right? And from style to style, I just add a comma to separate from one to the other. Then I can have the width 100 pixels, right? And I'm pretty much done. So I do not need any more on click here because I'm not calling a function from HTML. Instead, I am calling the function, I am adding a click event, let's say, to all the divisions with class square. Okay, so all of these divisions, they have the same class. So all those with class square, on click, call a function, and I'm gonna change this, the one that I'm clicking on, this .css, change their styling. So this is gone. Now, the only difference between the function in JavaScript and this method in Jquery is that the moment I execute this line, it will add the click event to the division. But line number 3 of my JavaScript file is actually being called at line 8 of my HTML, and at line 8 my divisions are not loaded yet. They are not added into the DOM. Therefore, I would need something like window dot onload, right? Yeah, right, equals a function, open, close, right? This is the JavaScript way of doing it. Right? Or the new way with Jquery, instead of window.onload, is my selector, which is the document, dot ready, and inside document ready is the same thing as here. I have a function. You see, it's like the class square.click. Well, there is document.ready. When the document is ready, I will execute a function, open, close, and right here is where I'm going to put my Jquery. Now, there are many methods that we can choose from. For example, instead of using CSS, I'm going to change it for animate. And what animate is going to do is that from the original CSS, we'll make the animation to my final CSS that I'm writing here. Oh, that's not mine. You see? So now, think about all the things you can do with animate. If it was in position absolute, and it was at top 0, left 0, and you want to animate across the screen, you can do it. If you had a button, when you click on it, and you want to open a whole window, right? So let's see. I'm going to create another element. ID pop window. Okay, so pop-up window. I'm going to give some styling to pop-up window. So let's say that this one is of width 10 pixels, height 10 pixels, overflow, hidden, position, absolute, I don't know, top 200 pixels, left 100 pixels. Okay, background white and a border of 5 pixels solid black, or like very dark. There it is, right? And I'm going to hide it, so it's not there. But when I click on these guys, I want to show it and make it grow. So then, in the same function, or maybe you want to get rid of this part, that's okay, but in the same function maybe, besides animating each square, right, I can look for the element pop-up window. Let's say dot show. There's already one method show, which will change it from display hidden, from display none to display block or whatever it would be. That's it. There it is. It appeared. Instead of show, I can use something like fade in. We'll show it, but fading in. Right? Fade in and takes 3 seconds. Okay? And let's say that I want also to animate it. And I'm going to change its width and height as well. You'll see now, to make it like, for example, 500 by 500 pixels. So animate will change its original CSS to the one that I'm giving now with an animation. So that's it. But it goes in order, right? First, it did fade in. After 3 seconds, it animated it. Now, there is something called callback function, okay? And the callback function will allow us to do stuff right after the first command. For example, after fading in, I can have another function. So fade in 500 and right after execute something else. For example, animate. This is basically the same result, right? But when you are doing the opposite, for example, animate, comma, then you will say, okay, I want this to take 500, like half a second, and then right after animate again, sorry, right? I can say animate again. So for example, this dot animate. Why this? Because I am inside the same element. I could also use the ID, but I'm in the same, so it could be this. Let's say back to 10 and 10. There's something here that I'm not convinced of, and it's this little thing. And then I can say, okay, the second animation also take half a second, and then do another one. And I can keep on adding callback functions, keep on animating one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, and generate a whole animation. These are called callback functions. So basically, we're gonna see this in another. We're gonna go through callback functions later. But a callback function, what it is just that you have your first method that will do something. You have a timing, and the second parameter would be your callback function. What's going to happen after, right after. Yeah? In the case of animate, right? Animate first will execute something. So let me put this, let's say like that, okay? First, I will do one thing, comma, the time, so I'm going to do an action, the time, and then the callback, right? So my action was to animate from height 500 with 500. My time, do it in 500 in milliseconds, half a second, or let's say 1 second. And the callback, well, execute another function which will also animate. Right? And inside animate I can also have again my action, the time, and another function, and so on and so forth, and a callback. Right? So each, if you go to the jQuery let's say for example jQuery fade in. There they will tell you how it works. Fade in has a duration, the time, and then the callback function or onComplete, what's going to happen after. Right? That's how it works. So here, for example, it says fade in, slow. Instead of a timing, they just put slow. That's going to make it slowly. And then after that, what happens? Once the animation is complete, what's going to happen after? Okay? So we're going to leave it there for now. Without callback functions. Just for now, remember, you can select something, add a method, and it will do it in the same order that you're adding it. So on click, it fades in and it animates, and then we can have a callback function to do something else after.